Visit sayitright.com for all your project supplies, tools, and instructions.
In this video, what we're going to do is we're going to take this very detailed headrest. We're going to show you how you can shape a block of foam. That's the first thing we're going to show you. And then we're going to show you how to pattern from the new foam to make each one of these vinyl pieces, and then how to sew it up. But it's good for all kinds of applications where you have a complex shape that has to be covered in a vinyl, and you may need to cut foam to match that shape. So that's what this video is about. It's not really about making a headrest. Let's get started.
Here's a sneak peek at what the headrest will look like when it's completed. The first step is cutting the foam to the general size. We'll show you how it's done.
Here is the old headrest, and I believe it goes to a BMW. I may be wrong, but it's a friend's car, and he's reupholstering it. And when I saw this headrest with the odd shape that he wants to basically copy, I thought, what a great way to show how to shape foam and also how to make patterns for really difficult things like this. So we're going to show you. When I removed the cover of the second one, you can see there's all kinds of horsehair in here, and I thought after I got the metal out of it, the metal structure, excuse me, I was not able to basically keep this foam from basically collapsing because it was all glued together. So we're going to have to make new foam and try to follow this pattern. We'll insert this in the new foam after we're done, so make sure you keep the hardware. So the first thing you want to do to make your foam is to measure the widest area. And I have 11.5 inches from end to end. And then the height I have all the way down to the longest part. I have 8.25. And it's not a bad idea to go a little bit big, but 8.25 is definitely gonna do it for us. So I'm measuring from here to here. So we're gonna use the Sayitrit foam saw, and we're gonna cut a block of foam. So you can see the thickness. This is 5-inch foam, and this is definitely a little bit under 5, which is perfect. So we have a block that is completely square. So we're ready to start the markings for this shape. We want to find the center that's of this block and mark it. 5 3/4 for us, yep. And then we want to strike a line in the middle, making sure that it's right in the middle. So I'm using a clear acrylic ruler to make sure of that. So that's our center. And we're going to carry this line all around it. And then we're also going to mark a line here at the center. So after we're done doing this, we're going to come back and show you what it looks like. So you can see we have the middle defined on every single side. So we want to look at the ends first. This end is kind of in bad shape, but this end actually looks pretty good. So I'm going to leave this end up. I'm going to spray it with Super 77 so that I can pattern off of this end here. Doesn't take much. I've cut a small piece of Durascrim pattern material, and we can just press it up against that edge, and that glue kind of holds it in shape. And then what I can do is I can mark around this piece following the shape of the end with a marker. So I'm going to do that all around here. So I'm going to take it off now that I have it marked around the perimeter, and you can see my markings are a little bit on the crude, so I'm going to straighten them up when I cut so that I make sure that everything is nice and smooth. So let's cut this out. After it's cut out, let's confirm that it's approximately the same shape, which it is. Now we're not trying to duplicate this exactly, we're just trying to get it close because we're not going to be using the old fabric, which was a disaster. We're going to be patterning off of the newly shaped foam. So our goal is to get it to look something like this, but it doesn't have to be perfect because we're going to pattern off the new foam when we're done. So now that this is done, I'd like to find the center here, and to do that I'm going to use this edge here as my straight. So now you can see this is up against that edge. Now up here it's a little bit off because it starts to take a curve, but here it's straight. And that looks like about center, so I'm going to put a little mark here and a little mark here. So now let's concentrate on this piece that we made that fit here. And we're going to position it on the end of the foam at the same, so those lines are going to be matched up. And one way to do this is to actually use the 3M Super 77 spray adhesive, and we will lightly spray this on the end like that, and then we can take this and position it on our crosshairs so that these are lined up and it stays in position and it's nice and flat. So reason we do this is we want this to be marked on the other side in the same location. So the same height here at the top is going to be on the other side as well. So once it's on here, we don't have to measure if we actually do this. Since we have all these crosshairs, we have crosshairs there. So this can be removed, and we need to make sure this long side is transferred on the other side. And to do that, I just need to basically mirror this. So in other words, this gets flipped like that. So the long sides are on the same side. So we're going to glue this, and we're going to match up the crosshairs like that. Make sure it's down flat, and we'll trace around this in the same manner. So we're going to cut off some of this excess foam here, and I'm going to use a straight edge, and I'm just going to come very close to that line we have here and do that. And here we can go at the, sort of this angle to cut this excess away. This makes the shaping a little bit easier. And then here we'll do the same thing. So we're going to do this at all the four corners, and then we'll show you what's next. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to transfer that to the side by just putting a line directly across from those on every single one of these things. So if we use a clear acrylic ruler, we can put it on that mark, and we can make sure that it's straight by looking through the ruler, and then we just mark down that side. And so there'd basically be two lines on each side of the foam that we're transferring to the side. So that one's done. The middle one, we ignore that one. And then we turn it over here, and we do the same thing over here on these lines. So we're going to do this all around the perimeter. So I actually like to use a turkey knife for Thanksgiving. You can just pick this up at any hardware store. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow this line and follow this line on this side, and I'm going to chop off this excess foam. And it's not too hard to do. It really does cut almost like bread. Now don't worry if you're a little bit off. We still have plenty of extra foam. But look, I'm being pretty stinking good. Now do this on a sacrificial table. You would never want to do this on your dining room table. Your wife will kill you, or your husband. And we're going to do this for all the corners. After we're done with this, we'll come back and show you what's next. Okay, so this is what it looks like after you get all the sides cut, and I think we're ready for shaping. However, we want to put in this top shape probably now. So this is the long edge, this is the long edge here. So we have this resting exactly where it needs to be. I'm going to put it up so that this edge is flush with this. I'm just sighting down, and what we're going to do is we're going to mark this curve at the top here. Now this curve, if you notice here, this curve has been compressed here. I can't have fabric going from here and then coming down here, taking a turn here down, because if I do, what'll happen is there'll be excess fabric up here, it'll pop up and you have to create a pleat, and I don't want a pleat up there. So I want this to actually come up, because I know how the fabric's going to behave, and I want it to come to a sharp edge here. So we're going to do that on this. So I'm just sighting down, and I'm going to say that we're going to come here, and I'm going to just put a few hash marks in this. And we're going to go to the middle position, which is right about there. Okay, so that's, now we have this coming up at a peak. Now we have excess foam on here, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually join these marks with a pleasing shape like that all the way to the middle here. And we need to do that on this side. To do this, I'm going to spray this a little bit. I'm going to spray this top edge, and I'm going to use some scrap Durascrim, put it on here, and we're going to mark this like that, and here, just so we know how this goes on the other side, because we want this to be a duplicate piece. Come up here, that's the middle. Oops, I actually removed some on my marker. Then we want to follow this shape. Like that. So now we take this and we'll flip it, but first we have to cut it out. So we've glued this onto this side because we sprayed the whole thing, and basically this makes it possible for us to create a pattern that is the same on the opposite side, like that. Okay, this is the danger point. This is where it can become difficult. I still want to chop away some of this foam. There's just too much foam here. So I'm going to take my electric kitchen knife, but I'm going to be outside this line, and I'm going to try to hold it straight. Not bad. So there's what we have so far. Now comes the time for shaping.
Now that we've whittled the foam down to the general size, we can start to shape the foam to the final configuration.
This is the Sayrite foam shaper. It's basically a mason jar with holes put in by a machine that screws onto a handle, but the handle is very nice. So I recommend it mainly because you can hold it nice. So we're going to take away the excess foam, and what we're going to do is we're going to try to match this side pattern more than anything right now. So that's what we're going to concentrate on. So I'm going to take this away. It's kind of like carving in a way. Now don't worry if this line disappears. We still have our pattern. We can put it back on there again and make sure that it's going to be good. Now what we're going to do here is we're probably going to show this in double time or triple time because the process is pretty simple, but I do want you to see it. So you can run this in any direction you want. What we're trying to do is come down here to this line and take away the excess foam. This does make a mess, and it usually doesn't get in your lungs or anything like that, but if you want, you could wear a mask. I'm just going to try to stay away from it so I don't breathe it in. Okay, so we're going to keep doing this, and we're going to sight down it to make sure that everything looks good. And then when we get to the top, we're going to show that again. But you can see, basically, we're shaping it to the size. It's a good workout. It does make a mess, but it does vacuum up. As we're shaping the ends, I don't want these to round over because that doesn't, when the fabric is sewn, this end piece is sewn on, if you round these edges, then it doesn't have something crisp to fall on. So what I like to do is I like to make these as straight as possible, or in other words, as a 90-degree turn as possible. I don't want to round the edges. You'll find that the fabric will sit better on a 90-degree edge than it will a rounded edge. So just keep that in mind when you're shaping the foam. Don't round the edges where seams are going to be. Okay, so now we're going to concentrate on this. Now I left a little bit of excess here at the tops on this side, which I want to do. I want to start shaping this. Now we do have to make 2 of these, and we're going to try to make them look very similar. Now my line is basically disappearing, but I know I can still see it there and there. I know I need to take away some foam here. I'm not going to take away any up here yet. So again, is it going to be the same as the original? No. We want something that looks nice. We want something that's similar. We know that it's skinnier here. You can see that it's skinnier at the top here, so it curves a little bit more here. And we want these ears to look the same on the left side and the right side. Now notice what I'm doing here. I'm basically just trying to create this, and I'm not trying to remove any foam up here. I want this to come to a peak more than anything. So I'm taking my time here and doing, what should you call it? Carving very slowly here. Still a valley. So do I have a valley here or a peak? If I press down, you can see that pretty much will compress nicely and give me a crisp edge. Now I could take off a little bit more. So I'm happy with that. There's a little bit of a V there, but not much. And we've done the same thing over here. A little bit of a V, but not much there. And the shape, I believe, is similar. Not perfect, but similar. And that's why we have to do patterning. We can't use the old pattern as our guide. So I'm happy with this. All this excess foam will brush off. This is the point where you can get it in your mouth, so try to stay away from this when you're brushing off your foam or in your nose, which is not much fun. If you're fearful of that, put on a mask. So we're going to clean up, and we'll show you what's next.
In order to make a pattern, we need to create a template guide on the foam.
First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mark where the zipper is, and I've already put 2 marks over here to indicate where that zipper is on the back side of this. This is our old one. And then I'm going to take a line, and we're going to go from mark to mark on the foam with our permanent marker. That'll be our zipper. You can tell it's accurate because it's this far from the center line over here. And it's a little bit off over here. Yeah, I think I better straighten that out a little bit. So I'm going to come, I should have paid attention to the center line there. I don't like having all these marks on here, so that was a mistake. I'm going to put an X on that one. If we look at our old one, you can tell that this seam does not go to the zipper down here. If it did, there'd be a lot of bulk here. That's why they ended it up here. So we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to mark basically where that's going to begin, which is here, with just a mark. And then we're going to come up here, and we're going to put a mark up here, right in the transition here. So right in the middle of this curved area here, I'm going to put a mark here. Now we need to put this line across the top, and you can see that I still have my black lines there at the peaks because I didn't hardly take any material off there. So I'm going to transfer this line across so we know where the top middle is, like that. Okay, so now I'm going to trace this from this mark to that mark and try to make it pleasing and about the same as the other one. I'm going to do this lightly because if I don't like it, then I can change it. because you can't just have one piece of fabric cover a shape like this. It's got to have panels, so a separate panel here for this shape, a separate panel for this shape, separate for this shape, because the fabric will not compress and follow this exact same shape. Now, do I like that? I'm going to evaluate it. So I made a little bit of a modification here. It just seemed to be better and match that. And then what I did is I didn't show this on film, but I made this in the same manner that we made the other ones. And you can see it comes down and matches. It's lined up with this edge here. And at the top here, so you can get it on there right. See how it's lined up against the top? So you want to make this so that you can mirror it on the other side. So we'll take it and we'll come over like this on this side and glue it on there, and then we'll put the line on this side. Okay, so now this should line up at the top here. That makes it easy for us to find out where it's going to go on the bottom side. And then line up against the side. And then lay it flat like it is. Beautiful. And now we'll trace along this. And hopefully that gives us the same shape on both the left side and the right side. And then on the opposite side, we're hopefully going to be able to use these again and see if they look good, even though the opposite side is a little bit different here. And you can see that, see how this is flatter here? But I'm still going to try to use this over here too and see if we can. If we can't, I'll mark it in the same manner and do it differently. But let's see if it works. I'm going to spray this first. Okay, so we got the spray on there. We'll start here at the top. Nice. And then come down the sides. Yeah, it looks like this is going to actually work for this side as well, even though it's a different shape. So we're going to do the same thing on the left side and the right side. So here's what she looks like now. Not bad, not bad. Now we do patterning.
Next up, we will pattern on the foam using Durascrim pattern material and spray glue.
So this is how you do patterning for anything that you don't have a pattern for that has a lot of shape. This is how I do it. There are multiple ways to do it. You'll see that on YouTube, but this way works really well with Durascrim pattern material and Super 77 spray adhesive. Now, seam allowance. We added no seam allowance. Everything is lined up perfectly right on top of where they're basically going to have a stitch. And shrinkage, we have to consider that as well. We want to compress the foam. We don't want our cover to fit sloppily. So we're going to be using a 1/2 inch seam allowance for these seams here and also for this one as well. Now, if I add a 1/2 inch, then it's exactly the same size as this and it doesn't compress the foam. So I'm actually going to add a 1/4 inch for any seams on each one of these panels and also the ends. Now at the zipper down here at the bottom, we're going to add a 1/2 inch here, 1/4 inch for the other seams because we want it to be smaller, and a 1/2 inch here. But this is actually not adding any fabric because we're going to fold that material a 1/2 inch. We're going to take it up in the zipper, and the zipper is going to basically be in the center of this. So consider this as being a complete circle that's perfect in size right now, and everything else will need to have the 1/4 inch added except for a 1/2 inch for the zipper. And hopefully that explains it well. I know it's a lot of information, but it'll make sense as we go.
Here are some general guidelines to consider when patterning contoured shapes. Traditional shape changes typically require the need for a separate piece of fabric to be cut to fit the transition. The second panel's edge is usually placed mid-center of the curve or transition for best results. When patterning for fabric, the pattern material must sit flat up against the foam with little to no wrinkles. If it does not, consider modifying the shape of the foam or adding another panel of fabric to accommodate the shape. If none of those work, then you may have to consider adding pleats.
So I'm going to place Durascrim over this, making sure that I go all the way to the zipper on the underside with some extra, like that, about 1 or 2 inches extra. And at first I want to cut this to the general size, a little oversize. So I have an inch or so over here, and I'll have an inch over here. If you don't cut this to size a little bit, then it's really hard to work with. So let's do this first. Get that out of the way. And now will this wrap around here? See all those wrinkles at the top? Well, the wrinkles are there because this has some shape and fabric won't follow that shape. So we're going to make sure it's down here over the zipper, and I'm going to just mark about a 1/2 inch away from these edges with my marker here, and then a 1/2 inch over here, 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 and here, and then we're not going to mark down here, so we should have plenty of material. So I'm going to take this. Oh, I should mark the center. I didn't do that. I'm going to mark the center 1/2 inch everywhere. I'm going to mark where that center line is here. I'm going to do that right here and right here. A little bit I don't want to be in my material. I'm using this as a reference to fold it in half. Then I'll fold it in half from mark to mark, like that. Oops, I hope I have enough material over here. Oh yeah, I think I do. So we're going to cut it to this general size. This is not patterned yet. It's oversized, but this will allow it to take that shape, hopefully. Let's just cut off this excess here. Good. Now, fit, dry fit is what I call it. Same as in construction. Make sure that we cover the zipper. Yep. If this wraps around, covers the zipper over here. So perfect. Okay, so now we can move that out of the way. We can take our 77 spray adhesive and we can spray this area that we're going to be basting it to. Bottom side as well. Let's go ahead and mark. Let's see, this is the front. We're going to call this A, and we're going to call this B. Okay, good. So we have that on there so we won't get confused. Now this stuff sticks beautifully, so we want to make sure that we have enough material. Oops, I think this went the other way, that's why. Yeah. Come over our zipper line. Yep, good. We got plenty on the line. Wrapping around the lines within our pattern material. Okay, so we have it on, and the lines are clearly within the pattern material. I have enough material to come over the zipper. Let's just start at the zipper for this one panel. Make sure there's no bubbles in it. That's what the glue's for. We're going to carefully mark. This is our zipper line. We're going to try to do this as accurately as possible. Okay, we're going to go here at the edge, and we're going to go over here at the edge. This is how you do patterning for something you don't have a pattern for if you're making new patterns. Right on the edge, and then we're going to trace right on this line that we have. Okay, and you're going to do this all the way around. When we get to this zipper over here, we're going to have this come around, and we want to trace right on top of that line that we struck on the pattern material so that we know exactly where the zipper is going to be on both sides of this pattern. All right, so we're going to mark around this whole thing, and we'll show you what's next after that. We'll show you what it looks like before we take it off. Okay, so we have it all marked all around the perimeter, and we did have to add a little chunk of pattern material because we were off by a 1/4 of an inch. So we just added that and taped it with packing tape. And let's mark the A here, and the B here, and this is the outside surface, okay? Now, up at the top, we want to mark where this center line is. So I'm going to go straight across, right there, and I'm just going to put a T here and a T here. That's the top. We know where the zipper is. It's down here. I don't need to mark that. Those lines are directly on top of each other. So that pattern is done. I'm going to take this off, and I'm going to cut it to size, and then we're going to put it back on again. Turn it so the outside is up, doesn't matter. But we're going to cut right on all of these lines with scissors on our Durascrim pattern material. Okay, so now we have to put the spray glue on again because we want this to stick when we do the patterning for the sides again. So I know we've done this before and we're spraying the foam again, but it's necessary. We're going to take this pattern and we'll just start at the top in the middle and we'll lay it over there and put it back on so that it's following those lines. There we go. And if it's done right, now I know we have a lot of black lines down here, but these patterns are directly on top of each other and should be lined up edge to edge. Okay, so now we have to do the same thing here and here. Fits on there. Yep, fits on there. So now we'll spray this. We're going to leave this pattern on. So we'll spray this. And push this on. Look at that. No, there's a little bit of a bump here, but that's going to be pushed down in there. Comes around like that. It's laying nice and flat. There's a few little wrinkles in there. I don't think that can be avoided. We're going to try to see if we can get, yeah, we can get some of those out. Now, one way to get those out is to actually cut a relief slit in the pattern material, the top pattern material, to that line almost, but I don't think we need to worry about that. That's on pretty good. Now we take our marker and we mark right on top of the pattern material underneath. So don't follow the line on the foam, follow the pattern underneath. And I can see right through this. That's one of the nice things of Durascrim. And then on the sides, we want to follow where the edge of the foam is. Now I don't have any, I'm going to put it over here so I can actually rest my hand on the foam. It's a lot easier to have your hand rest on the foam than be in the air. So we're going to go around like that, and we're going to continue to mark on this all the way around. And then we're going to take this off and cut it to size, and we're going to re-glue it to the foam, and we're going to do some match-up marks. Make sure you mark where this middle line is now, because you don't want to forget that. I'll just come straight across here. Okay, and we'll show you what's next after we get this cut to size and glued back on. Okay, so I've already basted that one in place, and I cut the other side without being on film here, and we basted it in place. The idea here is that everything is lined up perfectly. It actually makes a cover without seam allowance. And if you've done that, as we show here, then it really should go together nicely. So now, before I go on to the sides, I want to do some match-up marks. Now, you can put on as many as you want, but in general, I mean, the more you put on, the more you have to cut out. So I'm going to put one, and I'm going to try to do it 90 degrees to this line. So right here, there's one. And then I'll come up here and I'll put one here. And then we have one at the top already. We'll come over here, put one here between panel to panel and here. And this is B, so we don't get confused. I'm going to put B on this, and this is outside. So we know what the outside is. I'm going to put A over here. And then I'm going to put match-up marks over here as well. And they don't have to go anywhere particular. Okay, we're going to take this end and we're going to line it up here, and we probably could use this for both sides. We'll confirm that. And all I'm going to do is mark around the perimeter the exact same size as our foam. So we'll do this, and then if it's off, we can trim it. Hopefully we don't have to add to it. Before you take it off, you need to put the match-up marks. Now this is outside of our pattern. We'll extend it when we take this off. So there's our middle. And over here on this side, you can't see it, but this is where our zipper is. So I'm marking where that is. Now unfortunately I don't have any match-up marks over here, but what we want to do is we want to make them. So what we'll do is we'll put a mark here, and then we'll put a mark here. And then over here, you can't see this, but we're doing the same thing over here. Let's take this off, and let's extend those marks into our actual pattern. And this one we're going to mark T. And this is the wrong side, because it's obviously facing up against the foam. We're going to cut this out with our scissors right on that line that we made. I got glue all over the place, and then we're going to check to see if it fits. Okay, so this is the wrong side. So the wrong side would be facing the foam. Let's just spray a little bit of glue there. Hopefully that didn't get in the camera lens. Match it up to the top and those marks we have on the sides and at the zipper. And that's pretty good, pretty stinking good. I don't think we need to do any trimming. So let's see if it fits on this side. So the wrong side would now be facing up. I'm going to put a little glue on this, hopefully not getting into any on the camera. This is the top where it's marked. Let's see. I have to put the top on that mark right there. Hey, look at that. It's a pretty good fit. And the zipper is almost matching up perfectly. Let's transfer this there and this here. Match-up marks that we have. The zipper is slightly off, but it's not a big deal. See that? The zipper should be over about 1/8 of an inch, but I'm not going to worry about it. Okay, so we're going to use that for both the left side and the right side.
In this chapter, we're going to take the patterns and transfer them to the fabric and cut.
So now we can take all of these patterns off. They should be labeled enough that we can tell exactly where everything goes. And we need to start patterning our fabric. Remember, we're going to use this one twice. We're going to mirror it. We're going to be using Eversoft, which is a seating vinyl. It has a nice texture to it. It's a 4-way stretch. In other words, it stretches on the running length and on from selvage edge to selvage edge, and also on the bias, which is very nice. Am I saying you have to use a 4-way stretch? No, you don't for this, but I recommend it. And if you want a fabric that is going to go around curves nicely, you may want to choose ultra leather, but for this, Eversoft. Right now the outside surface reads up so you can see it. When we put it on the fabric, we'll be flipping it like this. So I'm going to spray glue on this. You can also spray it on your vinyl, but this works pretty well. So I'll spray each one of these. Outside surfaces are up. This one's going to have to be flipped twice. So now we'll take this one and we'll position it on the fabric and make sure that you have at least 2 inches at the bottom here and here, and then stick it down, and it sticks really well. So we're going to position all these and we'll show you what's next. So let's talk about this main body panel. This is where the zipper goes, and we need a little fold in it. But when you're sewing, a curve radius like this, and an adjacent panel gets sewn to this, sometimes the amount that you think it's going to have for a zipper changes slightly. So what I like to do is I like to make this extra long and then trim it. So I'm going to put a clear acrylic ruler over it and mark it about 2 extra inches from that location. And here I don't have 2 inches, but I have 1.5 inches, and that's going to be sufficient. I just need to make sure that I have more than I would typically have there. So now with this, what I should do, because I didn't put the pattern on straight, is I should actually find the edge and make sure that I strike a line that is parallel with the pattern, which is right there. So here we'll cut this one out. This is with the extra. And then around the perimeter of all of them, I'm going to cut a quarter inch. I'm going to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance, but this 1/4 inch shrinks up the fabric slightly. Now you can measure if you want, but I'm just going to do this by eye and try to cut as carefully as possible, following the contour of each one of these patterns. So on every single one of these patterns, here, 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 and so forth, and even on this one, it'll be a 1/4 inch bigger. Now this one, it says wrong side up. We're gonna, after we're done cutting this one out, we're gonna flip it so that we get a mirrored image of it. And you'll notice that these patterns say outside, and they are not facing the correct direction, because obviously this is the outside of the fabric facing the tabletop. So we're going to cut a 1/4 inch around here. We're going to cut on this line with extra at the bottom, and then we'll show you what's next. So here's the top labeled with a T, and I'm going to notch the fabric. You can do this with scissors too, but this puts a notch in the fabric so that when we take it to the machine, we know where the top is. Now I didn't do it with this one. I should probably mirror it like this because this is the opposite one that we had to use the pattern twice for. So I'll just notch it in the same manner here at the top. Now what about all the other matchup marks? You may be asking these. Well, they're not going to be as crucial because we're going to start here at the top and we're going to sew around this direction. And then when we get to the zipper, we're going to stop short and we're going to sew around this direction. So everything should match up. But I definitely need to have where the top is. So here, this is the top. And I want to put it on both sides here. So I'm going to notch it here. And then I'm going to notch it over here. And am I going to notch these? Probably not, because again, we're going to do that same principle here. With this one, same thing. I'm going to notch it right at that line at the top, this side and also over there. Now, one more thing. After I get these all notched, I want to lift the material. I'm going to actually leave this kind of glued to it, but I want to transfer that B to this, and then obviously the A here so that I know how this goes on. This has the B here. Very important to do this because otherwise you will get confused. So just lift it up, mark the B. This one has the A on it. We'll do that here, and we're going to mark the top here as well.
Next up, we'll sew the sides to the middle panel.
Okay, so I have A and B over here. This is A, so it would be matched up like this. B would be matched up like this. And then we'll get to these afterwards. So first we're going to sew these together. So what you would do is you would have right sides facing each other at the top mark here. So let's start with A. A is here and A is here, so it's directly across from each other. And we'll start sewing from here. So you want to take the patterns off before we sew. Okay, so A is here and A is here, so we have it orientated correctly. Here's our center notch. We're going to start here, and this is a pretty easy curve. I'm going to put my magnetic guide right next to the presser foot here, and I'm going to move my needle to the right because I'm going to do a tacking stitch here. So I'm in straight stitch, I'm doing a 6mm stitch, marks are directly on top of each other. I don't have to be concerned about the stitch being straight here, I just have to make sure that the edge of the fabric is lined up. Then I can start from the center, sew this direction down, and then flip it over and sew that direction down. Then when I do my 1/2 inch stitch, I can sew from one end all the way without having a join or joint in the middle. So I'm just going to sew slowly. Notice that my worker bee power pack system is turned up all the way. I'm going to turn it all the way down so I have super slow speed control, which is very, very nice for projects like this. So now look. So now as I'm sewing, I'm just going to make sure that the edges are lined up and it's up against the magnetic guide. And this tacking stitch is not the primary stitch. All it's used is to secure everything and make sure everything's accurate. So let's sew all the way to the end. You notice I did not do any reversing. It's not necessary with this stitch. And so I'm pulling the fabric over, trying not to stretch the fabric either. I will have a little dog ear here. I'm going to use the pliers here so that I can grab hold of the fabric and pull it over to match it up as I sew. So right off of the edge, and we're done with that. Now what I'll do is I will flip the assembly and we'll start at that middle position yet again. I sewed in my top stitch here. Let me just pull it. I can't pull it. Okay, I'm going to put the foot down, and then I'm going to look underneath here and make sure that this is matched up as I sew. So I'm going to sew to the other end, following that same procedure with this tacking stitch. Okay, my tacking stitch is done, and this is the center position where the stitch overlays the opposite stitch. The reason that I like to do a tacking stitch is, see when I pull this apart, you can see a little bit of the threads. Sometimes when you start from the center and sew one direction and then flip it and sew the other direction, you can see a little bit of inconsistencies at the center position. Well, because we did a tacking stitch, what I can do now is I can start at an end, because we know exactly where this is positioned. I can move my magnetic guide to a 1/2 inch, and now I don't have to worry about anything besides being extremely accurate with this stitch. And I'm also going to move my needle to center position, so I'm a 1/2 inch from the edge of the fabric. And you want to be as smooth as possible to create the best looking assembly. So let's just start sewing here, and I don't have to worry about anything besides keeping the fabric up against the magnetic guide and making nice smooth curves or turns. Because if you do one that's, let's say, I'm going to stop here and show you. So if the needle's buried and I all of a sudden say, oh, I'm off, so I twisted the fabric that much, that's going to show up. But if you do it in gradual turns slowly, your stitch will look a lot better and more professional. So this is the advantage of a tacking stitch. It really just does that. We're going to sew all the way to the other end, and we'll show you what's next. So here's my B and B. We're going to do the exact same thing. Outside surfaces face each other. The B is on the correct end, and we're going to sew it in with a tacking stitch. So move this over, and then we're going to sew it to the 1/2 inch, moving it over to complete the same thing we did over here. So I'm not going to show this because this is the same process, but we will show it when we do the top stitch. We'll move the magnetic guide, and we're going to do a top stitch now. So I'm going to belay the seam allowance, which is this part here, the 1/2 inch, over this direction towards the middle panel. I'm going to reduce the stitch length to about 4 millimeters because that's just what I want for my top stitch. And I'm going to splay this apart, and I'm going to use the right side of the center foot as my guide. And I'm still set up to sew very slowly, and I don't have to do any reversing because we're going to be sewing over these stitches. So I'm just going to sew right here and make sure that I splay the fabric out so that it's on that first stitch that I sewed, and carefully sew down this. That's why I have that worker bee turned down really slow, so I could be extremely accurate, because everybody's going to see this stitch. Now when I'm sewing this, I need to make sure that my seam allowance is going that direction, which it is. I can feel it on the bottom side. So we're going to sew this all the way to that one, the other end, and then we'll do the same thing to the other side. So our top stitch is done, and there's the seam allowance on the underside. Looks good. Now expect this. This is normal. So what I want to do is I want to chop this off, and you can mark it if you'd like. I'm just going to eyeball it, and I'm going to come up here so that it's flush with that edge here. And I expect that on all of these. So don't be alarmed by that when you see that. Trim all 4 corners.
The end panels are small and circular, so we're going to do a tack stitch first to secure them in place.
Okay, so now we don't have a letter on this, but we know this long side is in reference to the A and the B. So outside surfaces would face each other. So this is the A and the B. Yeah, A. So this side would go here, and this side would go here, and then it's walked over here to the small side. So basically there's the T for the middle, and here's the T for the middle here. So we're going to take off this pattern, and we'll just go ahead and start with this side and sew from the middle out, doing the tacking stitch. Okay, so we've got the tops lined up, and one nice thing about a tacking stitch is you don't have to have it at a specific distance from the presser foot. You just have to make sure the edges are lined up and make sure your stitch doesn't go 1/2 inch inside where the original 1/2 inch stitch is going to be. So I can actually sew really close to this edge if that's helpful to you, and no reversing is necessary. And using these fabric positioning pliers is also very helpful. Try to position my hand so that you can see what I'm doing. So again, don't worry about having the stitch be straight, just worry about matching up the edge of the fabric. So sometimes with the pliers, what I do is I hold the top, and then I also press down hard on the layer below to position it while I sew that area. So once I'm happy, I can do that. And this is only really necessary for really shapely sewing, which is what we're doing right now. A really small circle that's sewn to a main body. Usually you don't have small shapely items like this. So these pliers are very helpful for this. Pretty much as a straightaway here, this is pretty easy. Now it's starting to curve again. Now there's my zipper. It's marked on this where that zipper is. I'm gonna come very close to it because I can rip up this tack stitch. Nobody's gonna see it. And then I'll know exactly where my zipper falls. That's why we have that extra fabric at the bottom. I'm just gonna stop a 1/2 inch to that point, right about there. Okay, now I'll take this out. No reversing was done. And I'm gonna flip it. And we'll start here at the top again. So we have to flip it upside down, and we have to sew with this on the bottom side now. So just put it in and I'll sew over some of those previous stitches. So this is already sewn down. We're just gonna start sewing here. I don't have to worry about matching up the edge till I get past that spot. This is working pretty well without those pliers right now. Now there's a lot of bulk in here. I should bury my needle so I don't lose my spot. There we go. Just straighten it out so that you can match it up and sew. Pretty much just straightaway here. It's going to curve down here and I'll probably use my pliers there. So that one, yeah, there we go. I'm going to hold this down. Let me turn these around so they're actually grip.
You're just blocking everything.
Let's pull this one on the bottom. Okay, we're coming to where that zipper is going to be, and I'm going to stop sewing here. And we can take this out. Another advantage of this tack stitch is that we can determine exactly where the zipper is going to be installed when we match these up, and there won't be any excess fabric around the perimeter. So you ask, why not just sew the 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around it and not do this tack stitch? Well, you can do that, but the problem is when you sew the 1/2 inch to determine where the zipper goes, you're going to have to stop sewing here and stop sewing here, and then you have to install the zipper, and then you'll have to continue to sew, and you'll have broken stitches basically. Because of the tack stitch, I'll install my zipper, then when I sew my 1/2 inch seam allowance, I can sew through the zipper, making it a complete circle, running into where I began and where I ended right here. So so I don't have as many stitches at this bottom edge.
Before moving on to installing the zipper, be sure to sew the opposite end on in the same manner. Let's move on. We have extra fabric at the bottom, which will make our circle perfect. We can cut it off and install the zipper next.
So this is the front side. We've determined where we want the zipper to be, and we're just going to measure from the first stitch, which is right there, and we've marked it already, so it's 2 1/4. We want to transfer that mark over here from that same stitch line on this side and mark the fabric. Okay, so now that we have that mark, we want to basically take the fabric and fold it without causing any deviations to where they intersect. So right there, and then I'm going to mark the fabric on this side as well. So those two, if there were a seam there, this would be perfect. And we're going to do the same thing over here. So now we're going to lay this flat, and this is the mark I want to go by. I marked it in the wrong spot the first time. And I'm going to lay this with a straight edge, and this will be where my fabric basically is zipped together. So I'm just going to put a line across here, and we'll do that to the other side as well. So I'm going to mark a 1/2 inch from that line, and then I'm going to strike another line because this is going to be folded over for the zipper plaque. So this will be our cut line. Okay, we're going to do that to the other side as well. So I'm going to take a 1/4 inch basting tape for canvas and upholstery and place it on this so that I can fold it over and it'll stay in position, peel off the transfer paper. And I really want this to be on that mark, but we also know that this is about a 1/2 inch. So we're just folding it over to equal a 1/2 inch. And the nice thing about double-sided tape is that you can modify it if it's incorrect. And we're going to flip it over and we're going to do the same thing to this one. So after those folds are in place, what you want to do is you want to come over here and you want to make sure that they basically butt up to each other if they were sewn onto the edge, which you can see it does. And if it doesn't, you can modify the hem a little bit. We've checked both ends and they do. So now we're going to take our zipper. This is a number 5 zipper coil, and I'm going to put basting tape on the edge as far away from the teeth as I can, and make it at least the length of the headrest. So right about there. I didn't measure, I'm guessing. Do that on both sides. So you can see I have plenty of extra zipper, which is not a bad idea. I'm going to cut it to the general size, and I'm actually going to separate it. So I have 2 halves, and then I'm going to take this and I'm going to peel off the transfer paper, and we're going to make sure that the teeth, you can see the teeth are raised on this side and there are no teeth on this side. It's basically flat. Okay, so now once the teeth are raised up here, and the underside doesn't have teeth, so this is a coil zipper. And what I want to do is just leave a couple inches on this side, and we'll baste it down so you can just see the teeth and over the flap a little bit, because we want this to basically be hidden. And baste that down, and we'll go ahead and sew this one on, and then we'll do the exact same thing to the other side. We don't have to worry about where the other side zipper starts because we're going to trim it after it's sewn together. Okay, so we brought it over to the sewing machine, and we're going to just secure this stitch. I'm going to put this foot right against the presser, or against the teeth, and I'm going to do some reversing here, just a little bit. Okay, and we'll sew down this edge. When I get to the other end, I'm going to do some reversing there. And we'll do the same thing to the second side in the same manner. So now we want to match up these edges of the vinyl as seen here. Remember I said I don't worry about the length of the zipper because we're going to trim it so that it's equal now. And then we're going to put the slider on. So the slider, make sure that the puller is facing the correct side of the fabric, which means it's facing in. And we'll just start it on one side of the zipper. I'm going to position this so you can see this. So we're just going to zip this all the way through, which means that I'm going to have to reinstall it again. This is a locking slider, so it's a little bit hard to pull. There, I did it. Went through again, and now we break this open because we've just connected the zipper, and we reinstalled it in the same manner. This gives us 2 closed ends. We're going to leave the slider in the center here. I'm going to trim the zipper so that it's basically flush with the edge of the fabric. And that way when it hits the magnetic guide, when we're sewing it, the 1/2 inch seam allowance, the zipper is kind of out of the way, and it'll sew through and close up the zipper with our 1/2-inch seam allowance. So we're going to take this to the sewing machine.
Now that our zipper's installed exactly where it needs to be, we can take it to the sewing machine and sew the final stitch on the end panels.
Okay, because I have that tacking stitch, all I have to do is sew a 1/2 inch around this perimeter, and I like to start someplace by the zipper because that's the underside, and also you just won't see that stitch. So see how this basically comes up just about perfect when you flatten out the fabric. So I'm going to put this in here. Unfortunately, this is the part that's not sewing. So if I flatten the rest of the headrest like this, I can make sure that I'm following that edge here and everything is lined up. So I'm going to start sewing close to that zipper. Needle's in center position. I have my magnetic guide at a 1/2 inch. I'm going to make sure that the edges are lined up. I'm going to sew this way. I'll be able to feel when I sew through the zipper, which I'm now sewing through it now. And I'm going to do some reversing there because I want to make sure that that's secured well. We already have the slider in place. So then all I need to do is, I'm going to bury the needle so I don't lose my spot, is rotate the fabric around and make sure it's up against the 1/2 inch mark. Now when I go around the curves, notice that my speed is turned up. I'm going to turn this way down because I want to be very precise on the worker bee power pack system. And I'm going to go slowly around this, and I'm going to try not to make sudden moves as I go, because that'll make for a much smoother stitch. See how easy this is? It'd be a lot harder if I didn't have that tacking stitch. I know I'm going really slow, but I want to be accurate, and I don't want to twist the fabric too sharply and have a weird looking stitch. Okay, so I'm coming up to where this curve is here. With my needle buried, I'm going to start turning this assembly around a little bit to make sure it doesn't get stuck on anything. Flattening this. I should make sure my needle's buried when I'm adjusting, which it is now. Make this smooth. Don't twist the fabric without straightening it back out to where it was before you started sewing here. So notice I twisted the fabric, but I'm going to straighten it before I start pressing on the pedal again. Smooth and gentle turns. It's coming out great. Love having the slow speed control of the worker bee power pack system on the Sayrite Ultra Feed LSZ. So I'm coming up to where I began sewing, and because I did some reversing there, I'll just sew into my reverse stitches and do a little bit more reversing right here. And that is it. And we're going to do the exact same thing to the other end. But notice the stitches, they're nice and smooth all around the perimeter. I'm going to open up the slider. At the top, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut away some of this seam allowance, which will make it to take the turn a little bit easier. Just don't get too close to your final stitch. We're not doing a top stitch, though you could do that if you'd like. And then when we get down to the straightaway, we'll straighten it up. And that should help it take that turn without having a lot of bulk there. And you can also cut little slits in this. Just make sure you don't go into your first stitch. And that's only on the rounded section that you want to do this, and keep it away from that first stitch. Well, there we go. I'm also going to remove some of this excess down at the bottom of the rounded part. Not the zipper. I'm going to leave that intact, but take away some of this. We could make notches down here too, so it goes around that corner a little bit more easily. There we go. So now I'm going to turn it right side out. Pretty easy. So I pushed my finger up everywhere, and this is the end results. Now it's time to stuff the foam. I also cut slits where our hardware comes out. Now we didn't show how to do that because that's basically different for all. headrest.
For this headrest, we have to cut out some foam. We're going to gloss over that quickly and show you how to insert the foam.
I have a hacksaw blade, and I marked it at the depth of this metal piece here. And this actually works well to cut a hole, so I know about approximately how deep I need to go. And I'm going to just start here. Probably just push it down. Well, I might have to actually do something like that to get it started. And then I'm going to push it down to that mark. Bear with me here.
If the metal insert needs to be put in a specific angle, make sure you make your cuts at that same angle.
So once it's at that depth, I'm going to use this and just kind of cut going to that mark. Let's go back this way because I don't think I cut over here. So now I'm going to grab it down here, and it actually rips pretty easily. So I'm going to grab it with my fingers and rip this out. Now don't worry if there's excess foam in here because the foam will compress a little bit. So look at that. We got a chunk of foam out. And this is the front. I've got it labeled with an F. Does this fit in here? And if not, then we'll just make it a little bit bigger. Looks like I need to go down more. Actually curves in a little bit. So I'm going to work on this a little bit to get it to go in, and then we'll show you what's next. This is the side with A and B on it, and this is A and B. Now this is not the first foam that I shaped. This is the first piece of foam that I shaped. The second one is what I showed on video, but it's generally the same size. I've also cut out this because this piece has to go on the inside. We did not highlight that because that's not the point of this video. So again, this is the side with A and B. So I'm going to shove it in here. And this is like wrestling an alligator. We just press it in. And believe me, when the first time it's in there, it's going to look like it's really wacko. But when you start pushing things to the corners and so forth, it'll start looking better. Okay, so we basically have it in the general spot. Now I'm going to take my fingers and I'm going to lay the seam allowance. So the seam allowance is over here, not over here. And if you do that all around the perimeter, things will look a lot better. Now this is a little bit hard because you have to squeeze your hands inside of here, but it will definitely make things look better. So that's my next task. We're probably not going to show all of this. We're going to move on to the next step after that, but I'm going to do that on both this side end and over here on this end. If the top doesn't fill in well, you could use some of this fiber fill. This is a slick fiber fill that actually works pretty well, so I could push it into the corners. You just have to make sure that it doesn't change the shape much. So I'm not sure I need it. I just wanted to show it as a possible trick for those of you that may not have the right shape. This kind of stuff can help that. So I'm going to push it up here at the top and see if we can get this to bulge out a little bit without having too much of a bulgy end. Yeah, that filled it out pretty good there. So that's a little trick. I might do the same thing over here. So this is the result, and this is the angle of the old one. When it's in the car seat, it'll look like that. This is the front, and that is the procedure for shaping foam, making your own patterns, and sewing them together. All right.
We hope this video has been helpful in how to contour foam, make a pattern from your new shape, and how to sew it together. It's not really about a headrest. Now we're going to show you the materials and tools that we use to make this project. The vinyl fabric called Eversoft is an indoor-outdoor vinyl material that's excellent for applications like this. It's a little bit on the thick side. If you want something a little bit thinner, consider using ultra leather, which is not really recommended for outdoor applications. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe and click the bell to be notified of new tutorial videos when they become available. I'm Eric Randall, from all of us here at Sailrite. Thanks for watching.